Welcome to Salcedo Paranormal. It is Thursday, May 19th, 2022, and tonight I'll be sharing true paranormal stories from the web. As always, you can find all the episodes of the podcast along with links to social media, ways to donate, and ways to contact me at the podcast page, which is salcedoparanormal.podbean.com. That's SALSIDO paranormal at podbean.com. Always happy to hear from you all, whether you have comments or questions or topic suggestions for shows, or if you have stories of paranormal experiences, whether they're your own or others that you trust. And you can either join me on the show in person, or I can read them on the show as well. And I believe that covers that. Let me see here. I think that's it. Tomorrow I'm going to do an episode that I tried to do a while ago, but it didn't work because of recording issues. Just about time and time anomalies. And then that will be the last of the topic-based shows on Fridays. I'm going to take one Wednesday a month, and instead of doing a book review that Wednesday, I will do the topic-based episodes instead. So you'll see how that goes. We'll see how that goes as I get into it. That's mainly so I can have more time for the for those episodes and also for the book review episodes. So just so that I can listen to more and review things other than books I've already read years ago, because that's what I've been doing a lot lately. So, oh, hello APOC, and yeah, that's funny. So my voice is really getting out there apparently. So, but yeah, so that's basically it. The good thing for that tomorrow is I already have the research done, so for the most part. But yeah, so I think that covers everything. Thank you all for listening, whether you're here for the live streams or you listen to the podcast or YouTube feeds. Those numbers are continually rising, and I really appreciate that. So, let me get to the stories. These are earlier today. Let me see here. This one says, last night around 4:30 a.m., I heard 4 really loud knocks on my bedroom door. It woke me up, and I responded with a, huh? Thinking it was my parents saying goodbye for their trip to Mexico. But when I saw what time it was, there was no way they'd say goodbye so early. I also asked my mom if it was her or my dad, and she said no. And when I left to work this morning, one of the plants by my door, outside, was knocked over. Could have been an animal, possibly. Also, sometime last year, or later 2020, I heard the same thing, but it was 3 knocks. It was around 6 a.m., and I opened the door to no one being there. I texted all my siblings asking if they had knocked on my door, and they all responded no, and were confused. To clarify on this first knocking experience, I lost a loved one at the end of 2019, and in 2020, I began my spiritual journey. I had asked for a sign in a letter I wrote to them that previous night, and heard those knocks the morning after. This recent time in hearing the knocks last night was very random. I am still spiritual, I cleanse regularly, and I don't ask for signs anymore, knowing there's a possibility of it being dangerous. My house has always had weird occurrences, but never felt dangerous. And in the bedroom that I moved into, that I'm in now, I frequently feel very light tugs on my blanket at the end of my bed, and sometimes like a small animal is getting onto it. I have a cat who is indoor and outdoor. I always check if it's her, and usually it's not. I never feel scared or anything. Just last night, those loud knocks spooked me slightly with how loud they were and the weird time of the very early morning. So, sounds like it's mostly sounds, mostly knocks. Um, that's in a way that's better than some things, I guess. Then there's other activity with the bed blankets on the bed being pulled slightly, and then feeling like there's something getting onto the bed. And that is can be common with ghost animals of different kinds. Um, I've had that myself with a ghost cat that comes by here once in a while. So it just sounds like there's activity in that location. Um, it is. I don't blame them for not asking for any more signs. That can be. You have to kind of be ready for almost anything when you do that. Um, it's understandable, especially in cases where loved one has passed. But I would always caution or recommend against doing that too much unless you absolutely feel you have to. Um, so, just because of all the stories you can find online about how that can go wrong. But that doesn't mean that things will always go wrong. That's just a possibility that you have to try to keep in mind. So there's that first story. Um, sounds like paranormal stuff, possible haunting stuff, if you want to call it that. But I don't know if it's the knocking is. I wouldn't think the knocking and then the feeling of something small climbing onto the bed. I wouldn't think it'd be the same thing if the knocking is loud. But I could be wrong. So, um, so yeah. So let me get on to the next story here. Let's see here. Okay. So let me see. All right. Oh, I lost my spot. Let's see here. Lost my spot. Okay, there it is. Sorry about that. All right. So this one says for the last for around the last 8 or so years, I have worked in nursing care, mainly in different care facilities for elderly adults, which at times includes end of life care. We cared for a patient who was an ex Army officer and Queen's Guard, a very tall, broad, larger than life individual. They were very proud of their service and still wore their Army issued footwear to special events, Christmases, birthdays, etc. After a deterioration in their health, they passed away. Their family came up to collect their belongings a few days before the funeral, but accidentally left the deceased patient's shoes behind. Our manager said she'd keep them in her office and for when the family could get up to collect them. Now we were all fairly tuned in to the paranormal on night shift. Pretty much all of my colleagues and I were believers. Eventually, a new patient moved into this room. A few days after their arrival, they activated the help call button, around 2 a.m. I responded to it, entered the room, which I found to be absolutely freezing. I switched the light on. They were quite clearly distressed. I asked what the matter was, and they told me, "You must help. There was a huge man in here. He was in the corner and in my bathroom." I asked what he was looking for, and he said he wanted his shoes back. He just walked past as you came in. Now, it takes quite a lot to spook me, especially after some experiences I've had in the dead of night. But at that moment, I felt the color drain from me. I tried to keep my head for the sake of the patient and reassured them it was just a dream. And that's where that story ends. So it sounds like possibly the spirit of that person knew somehow that the family had forgotten, maybe, their shoes. But of course, that new patient wouldn't have any idea about that. I wouldn't think, if they just arrived after all these previous events. So, those medical facility stories, they're something else, that's for sure. So, that seems like it's something going on there, and fairly easy story to track overall. Here, I'll go to the next story. This one is not too long. Let's see here. Did I read? Okay, yeah, I'm on the fourth one. No, I'm sorry. I'm not. I'm on the third one. Okay, it's just a short one. That's why I missed it. This one says, "Before I tell you this, please know I was completely sober and have no history of hallucinations. I was at a restaurant, and the lady taking my order, well, her eyes went weird. I looked at them, and they were all black. I did a double take, and they looked similar to snake eyes. I was really weirded out. She came back later to bring me my food, and her eyes were normal, brown. Funny thing is, she was super nice, and I sensed no hostile or evil vibes from her. The whole thing was just so bizarre." So there's a really short one, but the that's also just really odd. This is not your typical. It's not a haunting. It's not like the first couple stories. First two stories. This is something else. What was going on with the writer and the waitress that served her at a restaurant? Sounds like in the middle of the day. Now, usually, if you look into these kind of stories about people with different eyes, a lot of times it's a darker kind of story. If you hear, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of black-eyed kids or black-eyed people. Usually, it's a very it's a lot of times it's a very menacing experience or feeling that people get from these other people, or beings or whatever they happen to be. But I've never heard of the eyes going from regular to black to reptilian. I wonder if that's some kind of a transition that they would take. I don't even know where to go with this one. Makes me wonder. Makes my mind go to sci-fi. This idea that, and I guess it's not even necessarily sci-fi, but just that's where my mind goes. this idea that there are different species of beings on this planet, and some are hybrids between humans and others that are here. Now, the question there, I think, does is this waitress aware that that's what she is, or is she not aware, or is excuse me, was this some kind of a vision from the writer of look into maybe this waitress's ancestry, maybe? Um, this one just brings up all kinds of questions. So that's why I had to share it, because I have no idea what to make of this one. Um, so yeah, there you go. Um, again, uh, everything about that one is just odd. The changing of the eyes, the reverting to normal, the fact that the person wasn't hostile in any way. Um, so I have no idea. So I guess with that, I'll just move on to the next story. It says, this story takes place around 3 years ago. I live in a very small town in rural Appalachia, southeast Kentucky. It is home to a lot of folklore, primarily around my small town. It gives the name of the town here, but I don't like to do that if I can help it. To give a little backstory on the area and why it's such a hot spot, the hillside that this town sits on was a field hospital in the latter part of the Civil War. That's here in the U.S., wherein Union and Confederate troops were treated in the same area. So the area is rife with stories to tell. I dated a girl in high school that lived in this small town. And being that my town's size altogether is a little over a mile, I used to walk to her house quite often. One night in November, we had decided we were going to walk downtown just to get a little exercise. The path that leads into town was once a railway that used to go through downtown. But since I've been alive, that rail has since been ripped up and paved over to create the walking path. Excuse me for a moment. Got a cough coming on here. Oh, sorry about that. Okay. It's around 11:30 when we leave, and we spend a little time just sitting and talking in town before we decide to head back home. On the way back up to her house, we hear what sounds like a bell ringing. We stop and listen, thinking that it was a flag bouncing off of the flagpole in the Confederate cemetery. But then it hits me. The wind is not blowing. She comes to realize that at about the same time, and we just look at each other. Then the ringing got louder and faster, so much so that people were turning their porch lights on to figure out what was going on. I've never run so fast in my life. We spent a lot of time in the graveyard together. That was our place to go and get away from everything for a while. A few days after this occurred, we started paying more attention to the graveyard. When we came through, or when we came through, sorry, I noticed a bell at the foot of a grave. Knowing that people were buried alive sometimes, and that the bell was meant to be rung if you were falsely pronounced dead, it was the first thing that came to my mind. It also could have well been someone messing with us, but something in my gut tells me that's not the case. And that is true. Um, that that's all. Yeah, nice Men in Black movie reference there. Um, that is true that back years ago, people used to include bells with strings that were attached to the people that were buried, so that if they were still alive, they could move and make the bell ring, and to signify that they were still alive. So that is quite the creepy story. If that was being, if that bell was being rung, and there was no wind, and if there was no one else there. So, just a really, really neat story there overall, linking folklore to the current event, possibly. So, yeah, had to share that one. And, but let me see here. Let me go on to this next story here. Okay. This one says, when I was at university almost 20 years ago in a town in England, I lived in a dilapidated mid-20th century house with some other students. Some strange things happened there, and I am often left thinking about it. One night, I was in my room in the house on my own, as everyone else had gone out to a student event that night. My room was on the second floor. I distinctly heard the door open downstairs, followed by heavy footsteps on the stairs, approaching my door, and then a knock on my door. I thought my housemate had returned, so I opened the door, but there was no one there. I searched the entire house, and it was empty. My first thought was that it was a prank, but I heard no more footsteps down the stairs or anywhere else. No one could have knocked on the door and gotten away so quickly. I guess I assumed I was imagining things. But a few nights later, my housemate and I were sitting in the living room, which was adjacent to the bathroom, through a door that connected the two spaces. We were alone in the house. Therefore, you can imagine our surprise when we heard footsteps in the bathroom coming towards the door. We turned to look at each other in surprise as we both heard it. The door then swung open to reveal an empty bathroom. We both burst out laughing as it was so absurd. I stayed in the house for another few months and didn't personally experience anything else weird. Although another housemate complained about the sounds of furniture moving downstairs in the middle of the night. I often think about it and wonder whether I just imagined it. But then we both witnessed the footsteps in the bathroom, which was pretty inexplicable. So, again, another one of these stories of just almost typical haunting stuff. This time in another house. And yeah, it's it happens. So um, but more sounds, more footsteps, the door opening on its own. This time with witnesses, multiple witnesses at one time. So I've got one last story here, and then we'll be done. This one says, I have recently posted on here about how I had some scary things happen to me as a child. And I recently remembered the time I went to a cemetery by my house. It was about 12 at night. My best friend and I decided to go to the cemetery just for fun. That's I don't know about that one, what they mean by that. But anyway, that night there was a full moon, so it was lit up pretty well. And we didn't have any flashlight or anything. We went in, and it was completely silent at first, which creeped me out, but I ignored it. We walked for a bit, and we were about to come to a point where the road separated into two ways. And right where the road splits, there is a tree. And as we got closer, we saw this thing jump out from behind the tree. It was human-shaped, but inhumanly tall. It ran in the opposite direction. We ran so fast the other way until we couldn't run anymore. As we were reaching the exit, we both saw, literally, just legs running. We couldn't see the upper body. All we saw were legs. We were so confused, we kind of just stood and watched it once as we realized what we were looking at, I guess. As we were just standing there, we looked at it until we made it back to my house. Until we made it back to our house. My house. Not the best sentence there, sorry. We never entered the cemetery again after that. The first one could have been just a person. I'm not sure. But the second one was the one that really confused me. So that's the end of those stories. That's the end of that story. I don't know. Seems like both of those sightings were odd. In that the first one was really tall, based on the writer's remembering of it. Of course, the second sighting of just legs, I wonder if it was the same figure, if it was just legs, did they just not look up for some reason? Or was this something separate? Either way, that's a couple of odd things happening there around the same time in that cemetery. So, I don't know. But that's basically it for tonight. Again, thank you all, as always, for listening and for being here. Tomorrow night, I'll be talking about time. Time anomalies, time slips. I've already got some articles that I saved up. Some of you may have heard what I'm going to talk about before, but hopefully it'll still be interesting to some of you. So, thank you again for being here. I'll start my new schedule next week. Like I said, Mondays and Fridays will be paranormal news. Tuesdays and Thursdays will be the these shows, True Paranormal Stories from the Web. Wednesdays will be a mix of regular book reviews, comic book reviews, and then, like I said earlier in the Discord today, once a month there will be an episode where it's going to be what these Friday shows used to be, which is the deep dive into a certain topic. And again, these changes, they won't apply to guest appearances. Anytime I have a guest on to talk about a topic or experiences or anything like that, those will take place whenever works best for the guest. So, just so everyone knows, you're all still always welcome. Just contact me if you want to join me on the show one time, to talk about your experiences or a topic that you are really interested in, and we can arrange that. So, I've already had many guests on the show so far. All of you know who you are, and I appreciate everyone that has joined me here. And that I don't want that to stop. So, that's you're all always welcome. So, I believe that'll be it for tonight. So I will talk to you tomorrow night about time on the next episode of Salcedo Paranormal. Take care and have a good night, everyone.